It's a delight to be here. If you see me slouching a little bit, that's because I pulled my back yesterday. And I had to sit on a flight early in the morning to get to DC from Seattle. So I might lean and not be my usual agitated self, which is actually a good thing. Sometimes people kind of get a vertigo when they see me moving too much. Let me, what I wanted to share with you is the role of business in emerging markets and how do we make decisions and bring value. What we are seeing over the last year is some phenomenal changes that are happening around the world. How many of you that are out there believe that we are in a better place today than we were 4 years ago? One hand is up, that they believe we are in a better place. 2, how many of you believe that companies are doing their part? 2. So everybody else kind of looks at us, or at least me, and thinks that we are the problem. And in some ways, when you look at today, there is more demonstrations in Egypt, Occupy Wall Street, Tunisia, Syria, Libya, London, India, just about everywhere, Greece, God knows what's going to happen in Italy and the rest of Europe. What we are seeing is this enormous amount of change. And that shift is also taking place, and the repercussions of that shift is also taking place simply because of the technology that we have available that allows us to communicate in a way that we've never communicated before. We're no longer at the receiving end of information. We're at the center of information flow. We are creators, consumers, and commentators, all simultaneously around information flow. So when you take global changes that are taking place, which are being manifested in social change, and you've got technology change that is happening at the same time, what you are seeing is an accelerated shift around the opportunity divide. A couple of months ago, I gave a talk to the incoming class at Columbia. I spoke for about, when I was there in the auditorium for about 2.5 hours, because the students had enormous amount of questions. And they were all concerned about the impact of technology on the economy and their future. So what we are seeing is this great concern around what we call the opportunity divide. And the question then becomes, what role are we playing as corporations to bridge that opportunity divide where we are now able to first empower individuals, provide them with the ability to imagine their future, and then support them in a way that they can realize what they want to be and their dreams. So that's essentially how we at Microsoft think about what are we doing around our investments as we think about bridging the opportunity divide. So when we think of ourselves as a company, we are clearly in some way ubiquitous through our technology. whether it is in your home, in your office, in your hands, up in the cloud. And what is that opportunity? And how can we create a valuable space where we can provide training and capacity building, what I like to call cradle to career. So there is an opportunity for individuals at every stage of their life, so that through those skill sets, they can realize their dreams. So let me give you a few examples. And this issue, by the way, that I'm talking about is being felt across the world. Whether it is right here, you can walk down the street into some of the neighborhoods here and you will see the exact same issue. Or whether you are in London, or in Kenya, or in Brazil, or in China. So the youth and young people are all concerned. So what can we do? So we kind of look at it from several perspectives, and I'll just give you a few examples very quickly. One, how do we build the capacity of the underserved community? So through technology, they can get the skill sets to either get into a job or they can start their own enterprise. Now, enterprise is a big word, but we are basically talking about a small business and become an entrepreneur. Because technology is ubiquitous, and if we don't provide them with that skill sets, we're just not going to be able to do that. And we work through nonprofit organizations in over 100 countries, where we've set up 70,000 community technology centers, and we've reached over 190 million people that have gone through training, some at the absolute basic level, and others that has led to certification, and that puts them on a track for higher end technology work. So that's one level of work that we do. The second is, how do you excite the imagination of individuals to change the world? We run a competition called the Imagine Cup, where over 400,000 students from around the world enter and participate. And the goal of the competition is to use technology to address the Millennium Development Goals. And there are teams that are formed and compete, and we've been doing that for 9 years now. And some fascinating solutions are coming out, which are being turned into companies. There's a team from Brazil that developed a software that allowed a blind person to walk through a street by getting GPS coordinates and then a voice that is telling them what to do. Another team from the Czech Republic developed a handheld data gathering system which has been used in Haiti during the earthquake and actually the cholera outbreak, where they were able to map the hotspots and then do specific interventions there, and then in Japan. There's another group from Ireland that won this year, which is looking at education, and education as a solution by using radio waves to send out signals over the internet, and using white spaces as a way to bridge that gap. So small bits of educational materials can be distributed in the most effective way. So we've seen solutions ranging from healthcare, education, environment, and all sorts of things that young people are doing, which are then being turned into some sort of businesses. And to do that, we then also provide them with incentives and grants that become investments into their enterprise and help them get to scale. So that's a second piece of work that we do. The third is to look at how can we take IT entrepreneurs, young IT entrepreneurs, and build their capacity to set up their company. It's a program called BizSpark, where we provide software and software capacity to these young companies for 3 years so they don't have to spend any money on utilizing technology, and then create a network and expose them to venture capital so that they can grow. Clearly, this is in our interest also as a company to ensure that there are entrepreneurs out there that are growing the IT business. So this is not just an altruistic way of doing things. It is ensuring that it is tied to the core competency of who we are as a company. We have a website which is called Student to Business, where we link students to potential job opportunities in the IT space. So these are obviously kids that are coming out with technology training, IT training, and as a company, we have over 600,000 business partners that are Microsoft certified partners that generate revenue because they are providing solutions and services on the Microsoft technology. And that generates to a significant revenue for these companies. For every dollar that Microsoft generates in revenue, our partners generate anywhere from 6 to 18, depending on the GDP of the country. So you can quickly see that it is a multi-billion-dollar industry, employing far more individuals than we will ever be able to employ. But if you're not creating the ecosystem to feed individuals with the right training into that space, we as a company will not be able to grow. So that becomes a way for us to think about how to grow the economy, how to provide opportunities, and how to close the opportunity divide. Let me just end with one example, which is what I love. How many of you know of this device that we launched last year called the Connect? Come on, everybody needs to put up their hands. Don't tell me you don't play games. So this is a $150 camera which you put in front of the Xbox, and now you can use your body to play games. So there is no remote control. You can wave your hands, you can jump in front of it. It's a beautiful piece of technology. But what happened in the first 6 months, as we sold 10 million units, there was the same number of individuals that were innovating on that technology and came up with millions of different uses for that device. Essentially, they hacked into it. And they wrote different code to put a camera on a robot and send it into an earthquake zone to find people. Put that camera on top of someone's head and got them to walk through this corridor by giving remote signals and mapping so that a blind person can actually see. I just demoed a solution last Saturday at the TED conference where faculty and students from the University of Washington are doing remote robotic haptic surgery using that device, where you can actually now move that device by using your hand here with an operating arm attached miles away, and you can actually feel the touch, and you can feel sensation by doing that. Now, this is mind-boggling. The point that I'm trying to make here is that by allowing innovation to happen, the company could have reacted very negatively to all of this and said, you cannot break into our software. Instead, they actually issued the code to allow individuals to experiment on it and create new uses for non-commercial purposes. And this month, we're going to release the next version of the code that will allow you to innovate on it for commercial purposes, because you see the potential. The point I'm trying to make here is, if we are going to come out of this economic cycle that we have and the social challenges that we face, each and every one of us will have to become an innovator. We will have to innovate our way out of this situation. You, me, and everybody else have a creative spark. And based on platforms that are out there, whether it is Microsoft or Abbott or Walmart or anybody else that is actually in this room, are all creating fantastic solutions which allows for innovators to come and innovate and expand and thereby become the engines of economic growth. And that's where I see the future in how corporations, businesses are going to interact with individuals to bring about change. From our perspective, we are a technology company, and we find technology to be invigorating. A lot of you see technology as disruptive. But I want to leave you behind with a simple message. Disruption is your friend. Embrace it. Thank you.
It's a great honor to be with you all today to talk about this incredibly important theme. The theme for this next panel is about the business case for tackling social needs. And you're going to hear in a few minutes a little bit about the tremendous experiences that this group of panelists has had in addressing this issue. Before we jump into that, I think it's important for us to recognize where we are in this process. As Akhtar was talking about, there's been incredible dynamism in this last year around companies finding new ways to have social impact. But really in so many ways, despite all the powerful things that you're going to hear about in a few minutes, we're just scratching the surface on this. There's so much more to be done. There's so many more opportunities out there. I think when people like us are asked to speak in front of panels, oftentimes we can convince ourselves that we have all the answers. And I know that I fall prey to this from time to time. So when I get a little bit of a swollen head about how much I know about this issue, I try to remember a lesson that my son Braun taught me. So let me tell you about Braun. So Braun now is 13, but back when Braun was 5, we were driving in the car one day, and he was in the back seat. And Braun said to me, he said, "Daddy, I've been thinking about this, and I've decided that I'm the smartest one in the family." And I chuckled a little bit, and I said, "Well, Braun, you are very smart, but what about your brother and your sister? They're smart too. Are you sure that you're smarter than they are?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm much smarter than they are, Daddy." And then I asked him, "Well, what about Mommy, Braun? Mommy's very smart. Are you saying that you're smarter than Mommy?" And he said, "Wow, you're right, Daddy. Mommy's really smart. But yeah, I'm smarter than she is." So then I said, "Well, Braun, how about me? Do you think that you're smarter than I am?" And he said, "You're so funny, Daddy. You're not smart at all." So I think if my 5-year-old was capable of reminding me of how little I know, I'm certain that you all will have many opportunities to do that as well. And I think as we are learning, we've got to keep that in mind. That although in some ways we're pioneering this work, there's so much that we have to learn from others, and the realm of possibilities is so great that it's important for us to keep in mind that maybe we don't really know that much at all about this. Let me talk to you a little bit about why I'm here today. I'm the managing director of a nonprofit strategy consulting called FSG. We were founded about 10 years ago by Professor Michael Porter from Harvard Business School and Mark Kramer. And we advise companies and foundations and NGOs and governments about how to have more social impact. In January of this last year, we published the cover story of Harvard Business Review about creating shared value. And the idea about creating shared value, as articulated in this article, is that the single greatest opportunity that is in front of companies in the world right now is finding ways that they can have more social impact and simultaneously improve their competitiveness. This should not be a peripheral thing. This should not be something done off the side of people's desks. It should not be done, as Akhtar was saying before, just because of benevolence, but that it should be at the core of what a company is doing. And the response to the article has been quite extraordinary. It's been powerful. It's been constant, and indeed, I think it's in a sense accelerated a dynamic that's been going on for some time. In this article, we talk about 3 ways that companies create shared value. The first is by creating new products or opening up new markets or offering new services that have a social impact. Well-known examples in this space are things that GE is doing in health imagination and eco-imagination. And indeed, you're listening to a group of great people, not just in this panel, but other panels that will have many examples of this. But that's just one well-known example. So that's the first way that companies create shared value. The second way is by re-examining the way that their value chain works, the things that they do. And you can look, you'll hear, once again, other examples of this, but some well-known examples are things that Coca-Cola is doing, things that Unilever are doing to reconfigure their distribution that have a powerful impact on entrepreneurship, on creating new jobs, and also are creating new revenues for those companies. And then the third way is around strengthening the cluster, the group of organizations, other companies, and supporting entities that allow companies to compete well. And you can see exciting things that Mars and Nestle are doing with producers all around the developing world to, at the same time, increase their competitiveness, but allow these producers, smallholders, to become more profitable as well. These are by no means exhaustive examples. There are dozens well, more than dozens. There are literally hundreds of examples out there of companies that are doing this sort of work. Now, one of the things that has come out of this article is many people have said, well, this idea of creating shared value is not new. And indeed, there are some things that aren't new. The notion that companies are finding opportunities to have social impact and improve their competitiveness is not new. But there are some things that are new that I think are important for us to recognize. One of those is that there is so much more of this going on right now. So if there were a few isolated examples of companies that are doing this in the past, there are many, many more that are doing it right now. In June, we had a collection of about 40 companies up in Boston to talk about what they were doing in shared value. A number of the companies here today were represented as part of that group, and they were talking about what they're doing in creating shared value. I recently took a trip to Latin America, and I was expecting when I was down there to be telling companies about this notion for the first time. And I met with dozens of companies in Peru and Chile and Brazil, and they all were excited about this. They were all excited about new opportunities for their companies to simultaneously have social impact and increase their profitability. And so that was exciting. So there is something new about this dynamism and this energy around this. There's something else that's new. And that is that companies are starting to see that they need to do this in a proactive way rather than a reactive way. When companies are reactive to either things that the media suggests they need to do, or the government is suggesting that they need to do, or their consumers are saying that they need to do, it's often hard for them to get ahead of what's going on. They're reactive, it's hard for them to integrate it with their strategy, and they will always be accused of being doing this in response to pressure instead of being really committed to the issue. And so we're seeing a new proactivity among companies that is different. And then finally, there is a dynamic where companies are seeing this as being an investment rather than a cost. I was speaking about this in Charlotte, North Carolina a few weeks ago, and one company said about their experiences, they said, what's changed here now, Dane, is that in the past when we were thinking about what we could do to address a social issue, we talked about what could we spend on this, what could we afford to spend, and we'd max out. We're a significant size company, we can spend $5 million on it, that's all that we can do. But now, when we're looking at it as a business opportunity, If it's $1 billion business opportunity, we can spend $50 million on it. We can spend $100 million on it. And that completely changes the nature of the dialogue within companies. So these are some new things that are going on. Companies are finding new ways to integrate this into their business. There's one more dynamic that I want to mention before introducing our panelists so that you can hear some of their experiences as well. And that is that, and this is a bit subtle, but it is definitely noticeable, that is that companies are starting to cheer each other on in this space. As more and more companies are learning about how to do this and learning from others about how to do this and struggling with ways to find ways to integrate it into their business strategies, they are encouraged by what other companies were doing. If in the past there was a competition about who could get the most public acclaim for what they're doing, now there's a sense of, oh, I'm glad that this other company is doing it because we can learn from this and it's going to help change the dialogue about the importance of this. And indeed, as we were talking on the phone the other day about this panel, there was a sense even within this group about cheering each other on, glad to hear about the examples that of what others are doing because of the importance of changing the dialogue around this and of the opportunities to learn from each other. So let me start introducing our panelists here. First, you're going to hear from Jeff Richardson. Jeff is the Vice President of the Abbott Fund, and he oversees the Global Health Access Program in resource-poor settings throughout the world. Jeff started the fund's international granting program when he led the team that created it, developed, and implemented the fund's Global AIDS Care Program in 2000. And I can say that we know from personal experience that Jeff is really a pioneer in thinking about how to use the power of the pharmaceutical industry to address the needs of patients who are really underserved throughout the world. So Jeff, please, would you share with us some of your experiences?
Thank you, Dane. Well, I think both Akhtar and Dane did a great job of teeing this up, and so I'll try to cut to the chase a little more quickly. Let me just acknowledge that how we got to the point where we are, I think, doing a better job of developing a business case within Abbott and the Abbott Fund really was predicated on a few major changes that are evolving. And first, let me just say the Abbott Fund, I think all of you know, is the philanthropic arm of Abbott Laboratories. And so just so you understand that the relationship, we're fully funded by Abbott 100%. And we basically are broken into two different divisions. One, the international group, which I oversee, and then we have a domestic group as well. Roughly about $25 million from each group going out a year, about $50 million a year. So just so you have a context of who we are and where I fit in that context. I report to Kathy Pickus, who is the head of Global Citizenship and Policy. In addition to overseeing the fund, she sees our citizenship functions as well as our volunteer program, product donation program. So that's the context and if you will, the organizational chart where I fit. And some of this is I'm going to just say top line because I think again some of it's been covered. But there's been, since I've been at the fund since '99, there's been a tremendous growth in complexity in the work that we're doing and how we need to achieve it. We have tremendous environmental challenges. We see a greater role for the company, of course, in global health because we're a healthcare company, but we see this across the board. And I'm sure you hear this from Walmart, and certainly you reference Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Other companies are seeing this as well. We have, as Akhtar eloquently stated, the massive technological innovations that have, in many ways, really helped advance our work, but also, in many ways, have presented some challenges. We have a lot of resource restraints because the needs seem to grow greater and greater, and we can't do it all by ourselves, and that's a lesson in and of itself, which I'll talk about in a minute. And this has really made us rethink our traditional philanthropy. I will say that for the most part, when I first got to the Abbott Fund, and I've been working in AIDS since 1983, so Abbott asked me to start their Global AIDS Care Program, and we had done nothing, basically nothing internationally. Abbott since 1951 has done a tremendous amount of work in the community and still does. We're a major supporter of the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, the Shedd Aquarium, the Lyric Opera. We're major players there, and we continue to be, and that's important work. But when we started out in the international arena, we had no blueprint, we had no roadmap within Abbott, and so I relied heavily on the people that I worked with over the years to create a plan there. And again, as Dane said, we learned a lot, and we're still learning. Even though we're now into our 10th full year of funding various international programs in the area of AIDS, and now also maternal child health, nutrition, neglected diseases, and some NCDs like diabetes, we're still learning. And I often say we're building our house as we live in it. So in that context, we started to look in the last few years, how can we make our, if you will, check writing philanthropy more impactful and more sustainable. And what we started to look at were ways that we could be a bit more innovative and creative in tapping into especially Abbott's core competencies. And so this is a delicate area for people who work in foundations, because you need to be very careful about your 501c3 status, your not-for-profit status, and when you're interconnecting with the business side, and especially if there's even the appearance, that you're doing something to advance your business, your products, if you will, the sale of your products. And so in that context, we looked at this very carefully. We had a lot of help from groups like FSG. We also work with KPMG, their social responsibility group, with DAI, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, several groups that are doing really outstanding work in helping us think through how best to do this. And we came up, again, with help. This has never been done solely on our own, this really social investment or social enterprise model, which we heard about earlier this morning. But for us, we wanted to make sure that we kept the core health connection along with the business side. So there's many examples that I can give you of work that we're doing in China, in Vietnam, in Haiti, and in India. And I'm just going to give you a quick example now, and then I look forward to digging a little deeper when we get into the discussion part of our time here. We have now just started a new partnership that was just announced about a month ago with PATH. A lot of you know the Seattle-based PATH, of course, and they do amazing work, well respected. And we're working with them in India now to really promote this product called Ultra Rice, which is a fortified rice. But what's different than just us writing a check and saying, go forth and do good work, which we have done in the past, and we still do some of that, incidentally. But now we're saying we want to bring in our Abbott scientists and our manufacturing people and some of our highly technical experts to help them figure out how can we best make this rice fortified in a way that will help the most people. How can we then get it to the manufacturers and manufactured in a way that it will, again, be done efficiently and effectively, and then how can we help you distribute it so we can reach the greatest number of people. So this is an example of where we're using our fund dollars, but also tapping in to our business folks to help actually move this program along. And the goal is that PATH, working with Indian industry, local industry, will actually not only help more people, but actually sell this rice, make a profit, and then pour that money back into and continuing to expand and grow this program. So that's just an example of how we're looking at this in a very different kind of way. And again, I'm looking forward to giving you more examples, but it's very exciting for us. Again, I feel like we're back in 1999, 2000 on a new path. Again, we use the term disruptive. It's a little disruptive, and that's what makes my life and my job so exciting. I love doing what I'm doing, and the fact that it's complicated and challenging, and we're not clear where we're going, makes me eager to jump out of bed every morning and run to work.
That's great. Thanks very much, Jeff. We'll have some questions for you in a few minutes. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Sara Thorne. Sara is the Senior Director of Federal Government Relations at Walmart. And Sara is primarily responsible for international trade and investment issues at Walmart stores. She's involved in legislative initiatives and trade negotiations that affect Walmart's retail and distribution rights overseas. And I think as all of us know, what's fascinating is to see the transformation that's occurred in Walmart in recent years, how a company that has such an enormous footprint, that touches so many consumers, touches so many suppliers in so many different ways, how it really has, in many ways, changed the way that these companies and the way that consumers think about their business and their lives in a way that intersects with important social issues. So Sarah, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. And so just to put a little color on Walmart, many of you know us from going to stores, but we are a $400 billion company now. We're in about 28 markets. We source from over 60 different countries around the world, and we have about 2.1 million associates now worldwide. And I think the thing that really did make us change as a company is we got really, really big. And when you get really, really big, people expect different things about you. For so long as a company, we sort of had two constituents, right? We had our associates and our customers. And as long as we were delivering on low price to our customers, and that was sort of Sam Walton's motto, right? Everyday low price. That for us was good enough, right? We were taking it, we were using everyday low cost to deliver everyday low price, and we were doing a really good job at that. But after a while, when you are Fortune 1, I think society has different expectations of you, and I know that. And I know our customers started to say, wait a minute, you are so big, you're doing so much, you need to change. And also, at the same time, our leadership was changing very much, and we were starting to think about, in a much more proactive way, how do you scale and leverage to our advantage and to the advantage of our societies. And we went back and we looked at the motto that Sam Walton had laid out for the company, which is basically save money, live better, right? We save people money so they can live better. And we thought, what more needs to happen in that live better concept? It's not just about having more money in your pocket, but it's about creating better communities and better societies. Because honestly, we're so big that if we don't think about working in a much more sustainable way, we'll put ourselves out of business. And so we started in some ways with environmental sustainability. If you're the largest private energy user in the United States, if you consume more cardboard than any, I mean, if you actually go through and say, well, how many packs of Wrigley gum did we sell? Well, it's as big as the Chrysler building around Crispin. When you see that kind of scale, we recognized we had to think more responsibly about it. And the best way to start with environmental sustainability was to think about efficiencies, right? So how do we do this better? We're a logistics company at the time. How do we do environment more efficiently? And we looked at things like packaging, right? So why does laundry detergent have to be this big? And if you're the one who does laundry, why did you need like a forklift to get it into? It was ridiculous, right? So we could say to our suppliers, can you make it a little smaller? Can you compact that down? Can we save on water? Can we save on packaging? Can we put more packages on a truck and then there's less fuel efficiency? So it came out of this mindset of there are efficiencies to be gained here. It also changed us from being very much a logistics company, right? I got this pen, I take this pen efficiently, I use all my technology, I know how to distribute it, to a supply chain company, which is, how was this pen made? Who made it? Where was it made? What were the inputs? How do we do that more efficiently? How do we leverage? How do we look at the way to do this in a way that's more sustainable? And when we became a supply chain company, then it's much easier to look at the impact of our business on people, on societies, on the environment, et cetera. And it gave us much more visibility into efficiencies and how to leverage, because believe it or not, the global supply chain is opaque. It's completely opaque, right? This pen factory may subcontract to hundreds of thousands of pen factories. And oh, by the way, the ink may come from this country, and this bit may come from that country. You need to demystify it if you're going to create leverage. And so when we became really a supply chain company, and actually when we all, and the leadership in our company, saw the business benefits of doing well in the area of environment, it gave us an enormous amount of liberty to say, what else fits under that live better concept? What else makes sense? Coincidentally, at the same time, we were becoming much more of an international company. I mean, we're like a huge toddler in the international business. You know, we were founded in 1962. We didn't go international till 1992. We opened our first stores in China in 2005. So we were changing as a company. Now, $100 billion of our revenue comes from outside the United States. And as we were changing as a company and as we were thinking about that Live Better agenda, we were also moving into emerging markets. So stores in China, stores in India, stores in Brazil, stores in Mexico, stores in Central America, where you could look and say, there are inefficiencies here in supply chains. There's also huge need in the communities that we're serving, right? So we want the societies where you put a Walmart store to have some disposable income. We want these communities to be healthy. So we need to think differently about that supply chain to make it more inclusive, to make sure that we're helping the communities that we serve in terms of the way, as Dane said, how we approach that value chain and that sourcing. And so that led us to look at some other issues. And we've really embarked, and my CEO in June of last year said, you know, we've done a nice job on the environment. We need to think about next generation Walmart, and we need to take a bigger role in societal issues that are important to our associates and our customers. And so we started to look at other issues where we thought as a business we had a core competency in this Live Better agenda. One of the areas that we looked at is food. So outside the United States and even inside the United States, over 50% of our revenues come from grocery. So we have an enormous interest in how food is procured, how it's grown, and how it gets to our shelves. And so last year we announced our Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, where we pledged to source and sell over $1 billion from smallholder farmers. And we started to really lean into this issue of direct farm. So in the past, in many markets, when you pick up a cucumber, it touches like 15 different people before it gets to the shelf. And it costs a lot more. And we said, you know, if we could go directly to farmers and move them into our supply chain faster, we can not only look at how they're producing these products and make it more efficient, they can get a better return because they're not giving it to 15 different middlemen. We can get a better, fresher product, we can reduce waste, and we can make a much more efficient cycle. And in places like India, where 40% of the product is wasted from farm to fork, that's an enormous thing, and that's the kind of things like my logistics efficiency guys are like, okay, I know how to do this, we can do this better. It has great societal impact because you're increasing the farmer's income in some places from about $10 a month to $700 a month. And that's important, and that's areas where also, because we have a unique position as the market, we can partner really effectively with USAID, with the World Bank, with NGOs, who are already doing ag value chain products, right? They've got these projects in the markets, let's get farmers, but unless you have the market, unless the market's actually helping them think about what are the right supplier standards, what do you want to produce? You know, I hear a lot about these value chain products where people are like, great, have them make raisins. Well, is there a market for raisins? You know, if you bring the market into those products earlier, then you can actually create a sustainable, more systemic approach. And we've been saying to development agencies now, we don't want to do projects. We want to create a framework for how we're going to work together to best leverage the market and how we work. You know, one other example I'll give you is in sort of this next generation issues with hunger, right? So our efficiency guys were looking at waste, right? When we did our environmental sustainability goals, we said we want to be zero waste, meaning zero landfill. We want to be supplied 100% by renewable energy. Lord knows we're going to get to that, but it was a big goal. And we want to sell more sustainable products. So the zero waste guys started to look and say, well, what's going into that landfill? And a lot of it was food, right? Because you pull all of those products before their sell-by date. But unfortunately, most of the food banks in the United States are set up to sell cans and canned goods. And, you know, think about what you give away for food drives, right? They don't have refrigeration. They don't have storage. And we were looking and saying, we're putting milk into landfill, we're putting meat, we're putting vegetables into landfill. That makes no sense. So we used our philanthropy to say, maybe if we bought and helped buy refrigerated trucks for Feeding America, and our logistics guys figured out how to pick this up and do cold chain storage, we could actually take all of this good food and give it to the food banks instead of putting it in landfill. So it's a combination of a business imperative, a goal, a social goal, which was zero waste, but also using philanthropy in a very catalytic way to say, what's the missing middle here? What's the market? What don't we have? And you know, in 5 years, we'll give away. We've pledged to donate over $2 billion in food in the United States. And 1.75 billion of that will be in kind. You know, the 250 million is those trucks. And so I think that's a really new and interesting way of how we're thinking not only about what we can do in that Live Better agenda, how we partner really effectively now with NGOs, governments, multilaterals, but really how we embed a lot of these goals in the business, because there's a business interest for doing these. We've picked issues, whether it's environment, food, hunger, nutrition. I spent the last year working on our women's empowerment program, gender. They make a difference for us. Gender, you know, women control 80% of the consumer spending, right? You probably want more products made by women on your store shelves to align your supplier base. There's a real need. The business delivers against these goals though. This isn't about taking a wad of money and putting it over here, because that ends when the money ends. We want to create really sustainable growth by making our business leaders fully accountable for these goals. So that's a summary of some of the way we're thinking and the way we're changing. And I will say, I think your point about not knowing everything is exactly right. We can't, as Walmart, do this by ourselves. We don't know as much as everybody else, and that's why we really look for partnership. You know, when we started our women's empowerment program, the first thing we did for 3 months is have meetings with people who knew more than us, who said, here's what we know we bring to the table. What are the right goals? What are the right areas to concentrate on? How do we do this better, and how do we work with the community to make this a reality? Because, you know, we're a retailer. We're not a development agency.
Yeah.
So,
Sara, wonderful examples and actually an excellent segue as well to pass this over to Richard. So Richard Crispin is the president of Shared Expertise and executive director of the CRO Association. And Richard's going to talk a little bit about some of the work that he's done to lead the connection between companies and NGOs and other organizations that really do have that great expertise. So please.
Thanks,
share with
Dane.
us some of your experience.
You know, I was really gratified actually to hear Dane's opening remarks, particularly about realizing that I'm not the only one crazy enough to have 3 kids. I don't know if everybody can see, but I have actually up here my youngest 2-year-old son's favorite toy. It's his iPad. I get to borrow it from time to time. And I think one of the things that I think is perhaps most interesting about what's happening right now in social investing and really in business period is what I call the rise of the sustainability natives. You know, I look at my son, and he learned his letters and his numbers from the iPad. I didn't teach it to him, he didn't learn it from school. He grew up in a world that is digital. And he is also growing up in a world that kind of thinking, and particularly for those of you who are in school right now, that kind of thinking, I'm hoping that you're imbibing that directly from the source. And you're growing up in a world where these are automatically issues that are taken into account. Many of us, we've all done pioneering things to help build the corporate responsibility space, but we came to it, just as I came to the iPad. I'm a digital foreigner, my son's a digital native. We're sustainability foreigners, we've been pioneers, we've been activists, but you all, particularly in school right now, are sustainability natives. And what we're seeing is a lot of businesses and new leaders who are learning so many great lessons from companies like Abbott and Walmart and adopting those inherently. So they come into it not thinking of here's business and here's society, but business is in fact part of society. In fact, I would argue, I almost want to reject the premise of this panel from the beginning, because if you look at any business, inherently any business is fulfilling a social need. You can argue the relative value of, say, water versus a Diet Coke, but they're both fulfilling a social need. For sure, being able to buy food is a social need. Being able to get pharmaceuticals is a social need. Being able to get great technologies is a social need. When we talk about corporate responsibility, what we're looking at is how are businesses maximizing their positive impact and fulfilling their social function while minimizing the negative. And that is full stop what we mean by corporate responsibility and what we look at. And when we are working with businesses right now, that's what we're seeing more of, is that kind of a philosophy, that kind of a mentality being the beginning of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. And when we have what we run every year is what we call our Commit campaign and our Commit Forum. And through the Commit campaign, what we do is we call businesses, we convene them to change the world. to make commitments to change the world. And every year we select a certain number of NGOs and governments to make asks, to say, what are the big things that you're working on that you're trying to change the world in? And we then try to gather businesses up to get them to sign on to those commitments. And this last forum, we just closed it up in September. I want to share a couple of examples of interesting things with you. First, we opened the forum with a debate. For those of you who are here this morning to hear the conversations between the investors, I thought was very interesting. But we opened up our forum with a debate between cash flow investors and socially responsible investors, and had them go at it and say, okay, show us the data. Let's go side by side, spreadsheet through spreadsheet, figure out, is there and we had them debate the issue, Oxford style, is corporate responsibility a waste of money? And one of the biggest conclusions that came out of that debate was, and I had somebody run up to me afterwards and say, we have the data. Finally, if you had that debate like 3 years ago, the cash flow investors would have crushed the socially responsible investors with their data. The socially responsible investors crushed the cash flow investors in that debate. And you can go online and see it, commitforum.com. The debate is up there. We paired off the Vice Fund's Jerry Sullivan against HIP investors Paul Herman, and they went head-to-head on these issues, literally compared 5-year internal rates of return of different baskets of funds, and were able to show that social responsible investing can, in fact, beat pure cash flow investing and beat the S&P for that matter. The second thing that we saw was, as I said, a much broader context, and I think it's very much reflected in what Jeff and Sara both said, that as it's a sea change on the side of the NGOs and the governments as well as on the side of business. So there's a recognition on the part of NGOs that I think for those of you who are here this morning and heard Mitchell give her analogy of the chocolate sauce pouring off the table and being development dollars just sort of flowing off and being wasted, that there's an increasing recognition that pure philanthropy, pure donation, pure aid money, not backed by business case, not backed by hard-headed thinking, isn't doing anybody any good. It might sound great, but it's not doing anybody any good. And NGOs are, if nothing else, listening to businesses to determine which aid projects to invest in, and then ideally looking for partners to follow them with those. And they're also understanding that there can be a great deal of on the ground, in the society kind of knowledge that can come from the businesses that are active in those markets, even including what some people might have vilified as evil American multinationals. I'll give you one example. We went in to go talk with the National Democratic Institute, which is up the street here, and they helped put together a project called the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which, if many of you are familiar with it, asked governments in developing countries to publicize their tax revenues from extractive industries, and those industries to publicize their revenues and tax payments, so that then legislators could compare those two things and hold both sides to account. Because if you're not familiar, a lot of what happens in developing countries with large extractive industries is that the executive pilfers and doesn't put back into the collective coffer what is taken from extractive industries. And we went in very naively saying, okay, great, so that you've encouraged these extractive industries to build roads and build schools. Let's go see the clinics. Let's go see the great schools they built. And they said, nope, nothing like that. Those things, roads, schools, clinics, those are the province of the state. The state should be building those, not the business. And if the business is building them, there's something broken in civil society. And the extractive industries were actually the ones who helped to bring some of this information to the fore, because they were uninterested anymore in being hijacked by local governments for those payments. So we brought together NDI and Freeport-McMoRan, which is a big mining company, and they were able to talk along with the legislators from the Democratic Republic of the Congo about how they had helped to advance civil society within the DRC through these kinds of programs and through a more innovative approach, not to saying, how are you going to give more money or how are you going to do more within the economy, but just simply through transparency. Can you please just report exactly what's happening? And through something as fundamental as good accounting, you can actually accomplish a transformative impact. The other example I'll give you is one of Tycho and Action Against Hunger. Many of you may know Tycho as a company that a few years ago was not so well thought of for the actions of its CEO. Yeah, for our good friend Dennis and his paintings and expensive bathrooms. But Tycho is involved in many different businesses around the world, and Action Against Hunger came to them and said, you know, we'd really like you to write us a big check to help out with fighting hunger in Africa. And Tycho said, well, that's great, yeah, we can help you do that, but you know, we have a lot of really great water technology. We have water purification, water distribution technology. Wouldn't you like some of that? And wouldn't you like us to be there for the long haul and help to ensure that this program actually succeeds? And you know, naturally, Action Against Hunger was very excited to hear that, and they've now engaged in a multi-year, about a 3-year development project together, where Tycho will, yes, provide cash, but will also provide know-how and technology transfer to some of the poorest parts of Africa to help inculcate those, or ensure that those programs are successful. The other thing that we're trying to do is move away from a model of what I would call commitment without follow-through. So there are, my friend Jim Thompson is in the back from the State Department, and Jim commented to me the other day that nothing big happens without a press conference and a deadline. And I totally agree with that. The other thing, though, with that is that people do have great press conferences, but if that's the end, if all we have is the press conference and we just have the company and the NGO saying they're shaking hands, and the spotlights go off, then that's no good either. So what we're committed to doing through our Commit campaign is providing the deadline and providing the press conference, because we have an annual event where people have to come and be ready to make their commitments by October 2nd of 2012. But through our magazine, we publish Corporate Responsibility Magazine, we will continue to follow the progress of those commitments for at least 12 months following to ensure and hold both parties to account, the NGO or government and the corporation, to ensure that those multilateral projects are working and succeeding. So those are just some of the examples that I have. And if I could just leave you with one final thought, it is that business and society are not separate. They are one and the same. And there's a 13th century Persian poem that's recently been kind of rediscovered in English called The Conference of the Birds. And in the poem, all the birds of the world come together to look, realizing all the problems that the world is facing, and they go in search of a king who can solve the world's problems. And they fly all around the world only to come back and realize that the only king available is them. So the only people that are going to solve these problems are us. And really, in many cases, the best people on the ground available to solve those problems are businesses.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks. So I have questions for each of our panelists, but I think it's actually more important that they get questions from you all. So, and I think we're a little bit behind on the hour. So I'm not sure what the question, Bobby, the question process is. Do you have a microphone that you're taking to people, or people just standing up?
You can go ahead and call people. Actually.
Okay, right up here. Yes, you.
Nicholas Eichmann with App Associates. Sarah, you mentioned a business case for sourcing from smallholder farmers and also partnering with development agencies like USAID. Given, we'll say, the pace, speed of traditional development, do you also see a business case for moving forward with those development initiatives without a traditional donor?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it depends on the country you're in. So in Central America, when we acquired our companies there, we acquired a company called Hortifruti. They are an agro-processing industry. They have agronomists on staff. They kind of know what they're doing in the field. They've been working with smallholder for years, and they can go direct to farm. And so, in that sense, our partnership is more about if you're going to put more ag value chain projects in, come talk to us, right? Because we have an understanding. When you're talking about a place like China or India, where we're new to the market, where the challenges in India, for example, are so enormous. Sometimes you need a local partner, both to help you with the trust factor, like who is this big company coming with these smaller farmers, but also with the technological know-how. You know, what is it? What's the culturally? What are people going to want to eat and buy? What are the challenges? And it's not just donor agencies; it's other businesses. So it's Bayer Crop Sciences in India who's going to help us figure out what we're doing, or it's you know, other NGOs like TechnoServe who have been working there for a while, or Gates who built up an expertise. I think what we're figuring out though is our competitive advantage is that we're the market, right? We buy stuff. And so we can do demand-driven development. We can say we want these products under these specifications, but if we help our buyers think more inclusively about from whom they're sourcing, that can lead to a bigger development effect, because it takes more time to source from smaller people, smaller farmers, smaller businesses. And so it really is very much a local play for local stores. The global sourcing sort of jet stream of Walmart, you know, the 5 bajillion t-shirt buy, probably not going to work in a development sense. Probably going to go to a big factory in Bangladesh. But these local sourcing plays to local stores is where we've seen a better sense of the development effect.
Great, thanks. Other questions? Yes, here in the red.
My name is Maria Baldoff. I'm currently at the Corporate Executive Board. My background is more in the public sector. I'm interested in your thoughts. You know, when it works, it's great, but public and private sectors don't always communicate or understand each other very well. From your background, what are some things that you wish the public sector knew better about the private sector, that they understood better, that they did differently? What advice would you give?
Jeff, you want to? Akhtar, you're
I'm
chomping
not
at the bit
necessarily,
there.
I mean, I'm not necessarily sure that they don't understand. I mean, I think public-private partnership has been happening for decades. Nothing really happens without public-private partnership. Roads can't get built, water cannot be supplied, electricity cannot be done, food cannot be, and you know, health. So public-private partnerships happen. So I'm not necessarily sure that, you know, the issue becomes of how to reduce the friction that exists in any set of partnerships. And in public-private partnerships, sometimes the friction is much more than what is required. And what we are seeing is when we start talking about transparency, when we start talking about data efficiency, when we start talking about both groups coming together and sharing information effectively, then you start seeing that friction reduce. And that's when you see much better synergies come through. Also, in some cases, you've got to be very clear what outcome you want. Sometimes public-private partnerships are done on somewhat wrong assumptions. The government expects that somebody's going to do something. They're not necessarily coming out and asking it right away. The business sector is looking at it primarily from a market perspective, and then you start getting these frictions developed. So if you are absolutely clear up front what you want out of it, then public-private partnerships seem to work.
Yeah, just add one quick note. It depends. It's sort of where you are. And so, for example, we've had such a great experience in Tanzania. Of the $300 million we've invested in our international programs in the last 10 years, over 90 million or more than 90 million has been in Tanzania. We've just had a great experience with them. Very welcoming, very connected. They get it, what we're trying to do. We've been joined at the hip, basically. We just finished modernizing all 23 regional hospital labs there. We've built a new outpatient center at Muhimbili Hospital in Dar es Salaam, a new central pathology lab, a lot of behind-the-curtains work with their finance departments, with putting in new IT systems. I mean, just soup to nuts. And in that context, you know, I think we grew up together, basically. We learned a lot together, but it was very welcoming. We're also, and we have a number of Abbott experts there now doing the lab training, not just how to use the technology, but also how to manage these facilities. And so again, we have a real business connection there. On the other hand, we're in Haiti doing some great work with Partners in Health. And we're building a new nutrition plant there. It's going to make this peanut butter paste for malnourished children, but we're making the plant in such a way that it will also be able to make peanut butter that they can sell, which will help the plant be sustainable. And again, very excited, another project that I was talking about, like the PATH situation. So very exciting. But frankly, the governmental infrastructure in Haiti is a challenge. And so in that context, and this goes back to your question, in that context, Partners in Health is essential, you know, for us to operate within Haiti. I mean, they are, and I use this term very, very loosely, but you know, they're our governing connection, if you will. They have good relationships, outstanding relationships with the government there, both at the national and local level, but the government is stretched so thin, and they've got so many challenges that Partners in Health, we rely on them heavily. And then back to this last question, we're talking about, and this brings it right down to, you know, ground zero. We're trying to figure out about farmers and supplying the peanuts. And right now we went from a handful of farmers, so this is Partners in Health's doing, and about a dozen, and they've got up to 200 farmers. And when we build this plant, their capacity is going to explode. It'll be 10 times greater. They're going to be able to help tens of thousands of children, malnourished children in Haiti. And so we're now looking at exactly this issue. So should we go with some of the existing NGOs on the ground, or should we go directly, if you will, with Partners in Health, but go directly into that space and work with them directly and cut through, you know, if you will, the NGO middlemen or the USAID people. So we love working with, we except for Tanzania, where we have a 15-person office there, Abbott Fund Tanzania, we work with NGOs all over the world, and we love them. We consider them extended members of our family, but we do need to look at these kinds of things, how we can do it better and what makes the most sense. So we're right in the middle of figuring out how best to do this, and again, welcome anybody who's had experience in this particular area to talk to me afterwards.
Richard, I know you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think you can take Jeff's comments and scale them all the way up, because we've done at our core, we're a professional society for anybody who's active in corporate responsibility, whether you're on the NGO side, the business side, or on the government side. And in looking at that dynamic for the last 2 years, we just published a study that we released yesterday at the Chamber on what is missing from corporate responsibility education, on the NGO side as well as on the business side. And what we found is that, as you might expect, there's an elite group of about 10% of companies in the Russell 1000 who we would call leaders, who really get this kind of thing, know how to run these programs. They're awesome at it. The same thing is true on the NGO side. There's a group of people who just get it, they know how to do it, and they get it done. It falls off pretty quickly thereafter. There's a whole bunch of other NGOs who just kind of look at businesses as big piggy banks. They don't really understand how to talk to them in a way that's going to make them just it's a lexicon issue. Like, just can you say that again, but say it in a way that's going to make sense to a CFO, you know? And what's a CFO? They don't know what a CFO is, so they don't know how to translate it. So, to answer your question specifically, I think what I'm hearing from our members is that they would love it if NGOs and governments outside that leadership cadre knew how to speak in business terms.
Yes, you.
Yep.
Yep, you.
Okay, sorry, hi. My name is Sara. I'm counsel at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. And I was just had a follow-up question, actually, building on your question. You'd mentioned, Sara, that when it comes to partnering with development institutions, Walmart is sort of less interested in partnering on projects than on creating a framework. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit, just to explain, and maybe also if you could make a distinction with how you would engage with an NGO.
Sure. So, you know, part of it was we had to change to be able to engage better with NGOs and partners, right? We had to start thinking broadly and having goals and a framework for us to meet, right? The same thing, if you don't have a goal, right? If we're not saying we're going to sell products from $1 billion worth of project from smallholder farmers, it's kind of hard to get your CEO engaged on these projects. But I'll give you an example. So about 5 years ago, we worked with AID on a project in Guatemala with Mercy Corps and AID on farmer development with our foundation money. Good project, but project-based. And then when the money ends, the project sort of goes boop, boop, boop. And because I use foundation money, it's really hard to get my business to buy directly from that project. They can't do a sole select contract because it's self-dealing, right? So in a way, the foundation money hurts me because I have to be super careful about self-dealing and about the fact that I help these farmers and I'm going to buy from them. So when we went back to look at AID and said, when they announced the Feed the Future initiative, we said, you know what, let's not use our foundation money. Let's use our business. Let's think about what are our goals, what are your goals, what do we want to buy, where do you all want to put in new projects, and as we're doing that, let's do it together. So we wrote a memorandum of understanding We didn't exchange any money. We just said, here's Jorge, and he's the head of my ag division in Central America. And you know what? He's going to come to your meeting. He's going to come to that meeting of the Feed the Future folks and all the mission heads, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to get transparency. And you know what we're going to do before that meeting? We're going to map. And we're going to map out where we're already working together. And what we discovered was we were buying already 80% of the products from AID and MCC projects in Honduras. So we were already doing it. We just didn't know it, which was just sort of crazy. I mean, we knew it on the ground, but we didn't know it at the top of our both of our institutions to say, there's probably a better way to work together. And so that's what I mean by a framework. I mean, sometimes you have to do project work. In this area of women's empowerment, there's not a lot of, there's not a turnkey where I can put the market there, right? I have to think about what's the best practices here? How do we help small women entrepreneurs? It just isn't an area that development's focused on, so we kind of have to fail a little bit to know what we're doing. But I think a better result is this more sustainable function where, because of who we are, we're the market, right? So we have kind of that unique place. We should be thinking more about how do we work together collectively towards mutual goals, leveraging each of our core capacities.
Great. Sorry, I've just been informed that our time has come to an end, but I want to thank the panelists for their participation. Thank you for your great questions.